toward citizenship. Now, at the same time, you have very strong border enforcement. Now, right now, the Department of Homeland Security tells us the net illegal.
See this entire discussion at cspan.org. Live now to the U.S. House for work on fiscal year 2014 programs and policies. Votes expected at 1:30 Eastern.
With full attention and be wholehearted in all the tasks you set before us this day. We ask your blessing upon our Muslim brothers and sisters as they begin observation of the holy month of Ramadan. May their dedication to you, as you have revealed yourself to them, and their commitment to grow in relationship to you, redound to the benefit of our nation. Bless the members of this People's House with wisdom this day. As they continue the work of this assembly, guide them to grow in understanding in attaining solutions to our nation's needs that are imbued with truth and justice. May all that is done here this day be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
The Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina rise?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Clause 1, Rule 1, I demand a vote on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal.
Questions on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal. Those in favor indicate by saying aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The journal stands approved.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from South Carolina.
I demand the yeas and the nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question are postponed. Pledge of allegiance today will be led by the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Guthrie.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Chair will entertain up to 15 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise? Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Obama administration last week announced that it would delay until 2015 the employer health mandate, a crucial provision of its signature health care law. This is of questionable legality. Days after that announced delay, the White House said that it would roll back requirements for new state online insurance marketplaces to verify the income and health coverage status of people who apply for subsidized coverage. And this week it was reported that the Obama administration has quietly notified insurers that a computer system glitch will limit penalties that the law says companies may charge smokers. These disclosures underscore the fact that Obamacare is unaffordable, unworkable, and isn't what the American people were promised. It is time for President Obama to work with House Republicans to repeal the Affordable Care Act and replace it with effective, common-sense reforms that actually lower health care costs for working families and small businesses while protecting jobs and our economy. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island seek recognition? The gentleman from Rhode Island is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today because every American deserves access to an affordable education. Unfortunately, high costs keep too many students from realizing this dream. Now, last Monday, the interest rates on subsidized student loans doubled to 6.8%. Now, we have the ability to fix this, and the time to act is now. Now, this week, the Senate will vote on a plan to lower interest rates to 3.4% for another year. Authored by my friend and colleague from Rhode Island, Senator Jack Reed, this bill is a common-sense solution to another self-imposed crisis. Now, I realize, as does my colleague from Rhode Island, Mr. Cicilline, realize that over 40,000 Rhode Island students receive subsidized staffing loans and will soon be making financial decisions for the upcoming school year. Now, if education is truly the great equalizer, if it's the thing that's going to help our students achieve their own path to success and truly grow our economy, then how can we justify making it less accessible for the most economically disadvantaged? Mr. Speaker, we must act today to help students access higher education. I urge the Senate to pass this bill and the House to take it up without delay. Thank you, and I yield back the balance.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, spending the past week meeting constituents across my district, I come to the floor to remind my colleagues that the American people are incensed over the unwarranted targeting and mistreatment by the IRS. Without the administration's help, the House has done its due diligence to get to the bottom of this issue. But it seems as though a new scandal comes to light every day. Most recently, we learned about the purchase of wine, romance novels, and even illicit materials on the IRS credit cards. Add lavish conferences, improper contracting practices, singling out of adoptive families, and of course, the systematic targeting of conservative and religious groups. It is apparent that the IRS is an agency out of control. Mr. Speaker, the 4th of July causes our entire nation to pause and reflect on the vision of liberty our founders valued when they declared our independence. Liberty is jeopardized when federal agencies abuse the trust granted by the people. It must end, and the administration and the IRS must show Congress and the American people that it will never happen again. I yield back.
Time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman from Rhode Island is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, Washington's failure to replace sequestration is imposing real penalties on families all across our country. This week in my home state of Rhode Island, more than 3,000 civilian Department of Defense employees at the Naval Undersea Warfare Center and the U.S. Naval War College were furloughed, imposing the equivalent of a roughly 20% pay cut through the end of the fiscal year. And it doesn't stop there. Sequestration is expected to cost the American economy 750,000 jobs this year alone, according to the Congressional Budget Office. Americans have had enough of dysfunction, gridlock, and political posturing between Democrats and Republicans in Washington. It's time for Congress to start getting things done for working families. And that's why I'm calling on the House Republican leadership to immediately bring H.R. 2060 to the House floor for an up or down vote, so we can replace sequestration with smart, targeted spending cuts and new sources of revenue by eliminating subsidies for big oil companies and closing tax loopholes for corporations that ship American jobs overseas. Common sense solutions that all of us in this chamber should agree on. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does South Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, according to a recent editorial in the Washington Times, quote, the promise of Obamacare that would make health insurance more universal and affordable, it was obvious from the beginning that President Obama's scheme, a fantasy of politics and palaver, wouldn't work. The folly of the health care takeover becomes ever more clear with the appearance of the markers for implementation. Robust economic growth is crucial, and Obamacare threatens to make a bad economy much worse. Congress must listen to the whistle of that speeding train bearing down on us and step on the brakes and avoid the wreck that's still time to come. The wheeling and dealing of the dishonest Obamacare campaign has finally caught up with the President. Delaying the employer mandate while requiring individuals to comply with the government health care takeover bill is wrong and will place a burden on American families. We must repeal Obamacare in its entirety and replace it with a plan to preserve the doctor-patient relationship before this unworkable law destroys more jobs. In conclusion, God bless our troops, and we will never forget September 11th and the global war on terrorism.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, as a representative of our nation's busiest port complex and the co-founder and the co-chair of the Ports Caucus, I understand the unique security challenges that ports pose to our economic and national security. Ports are a crucial piece of our economy, and a potential attack or disruption to trade operations could have a disastrous impact on the American economy. Last week, the Brookings Institute released a study highlighting troubling cybersecurity weaknesses at our nation's ports, an all too often overlooked area of infrastructure vulnerability. We need to do better. And finally, take a comprehensive examination of the security of our nation's ports facility and develop a plan to address any gaps or vulnerabilities. This is why I urge my colleagues to support the GAPS Act, my legislation that directs the Department of Homeland Security to conduct a comprehensive classified study of potential gaps in port security and prepare a plan to address them. After all, think tanks aren't the only ones looking for security weaknesses at our ports.
Time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
Permission to address the House for 1 minute.
Does the gentleman seek unanimous request to address the House?
Address the House for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just last week, the administration chose to delay implementation of the employer mandate by 1 year. While this delay grants business owners more time to determine their options, it is not the repeal that we need. The House Majority Leadership sent a letter to President Obama today asking him to explain what prompted a delay in the employer mandate. The American people, families like yours and mine, are left wondering what led to this decision and why the individual mandate, which will be just as costly, remains in place. I join my colleagues in requesting this vital information. The requirements of the health care law have always left more questions than answers. I continue to hear from Kentuckians who wonder if they will lose their coverage, be forced to choose different providers, or be saddled with enormous new costs. Obamacare continues to be the train wreck that will destroy jobs, and we have to stop it. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Kentucky yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition? Gentlewoman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to call attention to legislation I'm reintroducing, the School-Based Health Centers Act. My bill is simple and straightforward. It reauthorizes the only source of federal support dedicated to the operations of school-based health centers. These centers provide vital preventive and primary health services to over 2 million students nationwide. They are often the only source of health care for children and adolescents, and they are easily accessible, keeping students healthy in school and learning. Yet the current economic climate, in this climate, many of these nearly 2,000 centers are at risk of cutting services, jobs, or even closing. And that's why I've reintroduced legislation to ensure that these important health centers not only remain open, but can expand to serve even more students. Students deserve reliable access to quality, comprehensive health care services. And at school-based health centers, they can find one of the best ways to do just that. I strongly urge my colleagues to join me in co-sponsoring the School-Based Health Centers bill.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier today, the Financial Services Subcommittee on Financial Institutions and Consumer Credit held a hearing on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's widespread collection and use of data. At this time, Washington is flooded with scandals over mass surveillance and political targeting. Over the past few months, Americans have seen and continue to see the potential for personal information to be misused and compromised by the government. Now another government agency that has touted itself as being transparent is spending millions of dollars to collect and store information on potentially millions of U.S. citizens. Even more troubling is that in today's hearing, the acting deputy director of the CFPB couldn't even give a broad estimate of the number of Americans having their data monitored. Americans have a right to know that their government has gone too far. It is time for the CFPB and the administration to answer questions from Congress, allow for greater transparency, and safeguard the privacy and constitutional rights of American citizens. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute. I advise to extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, this month we celebrate one of America's best ideas, our national park system, and what it means for millions of our families each year to be able to enjoy the park system throughout our country. As we mark National Parks and Recreation Month, we remember that the parks in America belong to all of us. We have some wonderful parks in California,
Yosemite National Park is in my backyard, and it brings millions of Americans to California who stand in awe of Half Dome and Yosemite Falls, Tuolumne Grove, and the Mariposa Redwoods. I have introduced legislation before this House that would protect Yosemite's vulnerable western boundary by expanding the park to include 1,600 acres that was originally intended by John Muir. This would ensure that we continue to preserve the park for future generations of Americans. It was originally envisioned almost 150 years ago. It has been said that nothing is more American than our national park system. My bill would guarantee that we're protecting one of the crown jewels of this truly American treasure. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 3.5 years and hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars later, this administration still hadn't figured out how to implement their health care law. What more proof do they need? More now than ever, it's clear that this law is too complicated, too expensive, and worse, failing American families. Last week, the Obama administration announced they would no longer require businesses to offer health insurance to workers next year, nor require states to verify residents' income before signing them up for insurance. While these actions provide much-needed relief to our job creators who have been forced to shrink paychecks and freeze hiring, it still requires individuals and families to obtain insurance. It also opens the door to more waste, fraud, and abuse of precious taxpayer dollars. American families want, need, and deserve patient-centered care, not the government knows best health care system. It's time to repeal and shred this broken law into ribbons. Let's start over with real common-sense reform before it's too late.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition?
Consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to congratulate Caitlin Kirshner, a constituent of mine from Madelia, Minnesota. She created the winning recipe in the White House second annual Healthy Lunchtime Challenge and won an invitation to today's Kids State Dinner hosted by the First Lady. Yesterday, I had the honor of meeting Caitlin and her family, and what an impressive young woman. At age 9, she created not only a healthy recipe that would make any chef proud, she did it making it healthy with 100 calories or less in the dish. Since she's been 3 years old, Caitlin has been helping her mother handpick vegetables and cook seasonal dishes. Her recipe for the competition was a garden stir-fry featuring many Minnesota homegrown carrots, broccoli, yellow summer squash, sugar snap peas, red bell peppers, and onions. There's no doubt that Caitlin has a bright future ahead of her in whatever she decides to do. It's an honor for me to meet Caitlin and her family and congratulate her on this high honor and her contribution to making America a healthier nation. I yield back.
Gentleman from Minnesota yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, it's now been 919 days since I arrived in Congress. 919 days. And the Republican leadership has still not allowed a single vote on serious legislation to address our unemployment crisis. After learning of Friday's lackluster job numbers, many pundits and politicians actually cheered. It could have been worse, they said. They also said things are returning to normal. Try telling that to any of the 11.8 million Americans who are still out of work, or to the millions more who are underemployed or have given up looking for work. According to Friday's job numbers, the average length of unemployment is now at 35 weeks. Before the Great Recession, the average was just 16 weeks. Mr. Speaker, it's no wonder people are losing hope. It's our obligation to restore that hope. As we begin this July session, let's commit to passing a comprehensive bill to restore unemployment for young people, recent grads, and the long unemployed. Mr. Speaker, Our
Gentlewoman's time has
mantra should
expired.
be jobs, jobs, jobs.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Nevada seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman from Nevada is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. When the majority leader announced a list of bills that the House may consider over the next few weeks, I was disappointed to hear that in July, instead of focusing on significant challenges that face our nation, House Republicans will begin the next chapter in their war on women. We may consider, we heard, appropriations bills and another farm bill that would have drastic cuts to vital programs like SNAP and WIC that disproportionately devastate low-income women and families. We may yet again vote on legislation to repeal or gut the Affordable Care Act, which has provided millions of women with access to preventive care and ensured finally that being a woman is not a pre-existing condition. What's equally troubling is what we didn't hear, what's missing from the list. Where is a budget to replace the sequester, which is prohibiting access to life-saving programs for victims of domestic violence? Where is legislation to create jobs, put Americans back to work, and strengthen economic opportunities for the middle class? And where is the Paycheck Fairness Act to finally ensure that women get equal pay for equal work? I say we need another list.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to join Leader Pelosi in expressing my condolences to all those affected by the crash of Asiana Airlines Flight 214 on Saturday morning at San Francisco International Airport in my district. My thoughts and prayers are with the families of the 2 victims of the crash on their way to a summer camp in Southern California. My thoughts and prayers are with all those who were seriously injured and face months or years of recovery. The miracle of Flight 214 is that 305 passengers and crew survived this horrific tragedy. That is due in no small part to the many heroes of that day: crew, fellow passengers, valiant first responders, SFO staff, everyone who evacuated the plane even when fire was burning in the fuselage. The crew members who carried a young passenger off the plane on her back because he was too frightened to escape. The firefighters and San Francisco police officer Jim Cunningham, who was wearing no protective gear, who entered the plane and helped 4 passengers escape, including one who was trapped. It was nothing short of heroic and remarkable. Plane travel is safer than it ever has been, but this crash is a reminder that we need never stop to focus on safety. Thankfully, the National Transportation Safety Board, under the leadership of Chairman Deborah Hersman, is there to fully investigate and determine exactly what happened. Mr. Speaker, this was a horrible tragedy, but we have much to be thankful for. I yield back.
Time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
I ask permission to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to call upon this body to pass comprehensive immigration reform. Moments ago, I was at a mock graduation of hundreds of dreamers. These are young, de facto Americans, Americans who are as American as you or I, grew up, played on the sports team, were cheerleaders, in some cases valedictorians in their high schools, and yet they lack the paperwork to prove that they are Americans. They are American in their hearts as any of us, and have so much to give to the great country in which they grew up, and yet they are prevented from doing so by the failure of this body to act. I applaud President Obama's Deferred Action Program. At least a temporary solution allows these young de facto Americans to have the paperwork they need to get a job or get a driver's license. But there's no certainty there. What becomes of them in 2 years, in 4 years? How do they know that the time that they spend investing and earning a college degree will be able to pay off with a good job down the road? It's time for this body to take up action on the Senate bill or pass a comprehensive House bill. We have a unique window of opportunity to do something very important for our economy, creating jobs for Americans, important for our national security, and important for our future of our country. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. Chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable the Speaker, House of Representatives. Sir, pursuant to the permission granted in Clause 2H of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, the clerk received the following message from the Secretary of the Senate on July 9, 2013 at 10:50 a.m. that the Senate passed Senate 793. Signed sincerely, Karen L. Haas.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, by the direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 288 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 39, House Resolution 288, resolved that at any time after the adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the Bill H.R. 2609, making appropriations for the energy and water development and related agencies for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2014, and for other purposes. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. Points of order against provisions in the bill for failure to comply with Clause 2 of Rule 21 are waived. During consideration of the bill for amendment, the Chair of the Committee of the Whole may accord priority and recognition on the basis of whether the member offering an amendment has caused it to be printed in the portion of the congressional record designated for that purpose in Clause 8 of Rule 18. Amendments so printed shall be considered as read. When the committee rises and reports the bill back to the House with a recommendation that the bill do pass, the previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill and amendments thereto to final passage without intervening motion, except one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 hour.
I thank the Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for the purposes of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Polis, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume. During consideration of this resolution, all time yielded is for the purposes of debate only. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
House Resolution 288 provides for an open rule for consideration of H.R. 2609, making appropriations for energy and water development and related agencies for fiscal year 2014. This rule contains the tradition reinstated by the Republican majority in the last Congress that appropriations bills should come to the floor in a manner that allows every member of the House, both Republican and Democrat, to amend those bills and to have their voices heard. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of this rule. The underlying bill making appropriations for the Department of Energy and the United States Corps of Engineers. The bill provides for $30.4 billion for these agencies, which is $2.9 billion below fiscal year 13 enacted and $4.1 billion below the President's request. At a time of fiscal constraint, when government, like our constituents, must make tough choices on where to smartly spend the money the American taxpayers have trusted us to oversee. The bill provides critical funding for our energy needs, making $450 million available for advanced coal, natural gas, oil, and fossil fuel technologies. Moreover, the bill provides $5.5 billion for environmental cleanup activities, funds to safely clean sites contaminated by nuclear weapons production. The underlying bill before us has been carefully crafted by the Appropriations Committee under the leadership of Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Lowy, Subcommittee Chairman Frelinghuysen, and Subcommittee Ranking Member Kaptur. Funding for energy programs is cut by $1.4 billion, while simultaneously prioritizing funds to advance our goal of an all-of-the-above solution to energy independence. Further, the House continues its commitment to achieve a long-term storage facility for nuclear waste, providing support activities in support of the opening of Yucca Mountain, a solution long overdue. The House Energy and Water Bill furthers this majority's commitment to spending taxpayer money wisely, cutting waste and inefficiencies wherever they may be. Once again, Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the rule and the underlying legislation. I encourage my colleagues to vote yes on the rule and yes on the underlying bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding me the customary 30 minutes. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to the underlying bill, H.R. 2609, the fiscal year 2014 Energy and Water Appropriations Act. Having this bill on the floor this week is another example of how we as a body, our Congress, has its priorities wrong. It's why Congress has an approval rating of 12%. Rather than fixing our broken immigration system and replacing it with one that works for our country, rather than doing something about the fact that student loan rates just doubled for students that are incurring new loans, here we are sacrificing our renewable energy future while simultaneously increasing spending for new and unneeded nuclear weapons far above even the sequestration level of funding. It's no wonder that this institution has a disapproval rating that it does. This legislation is fundamentally flawed. It underfunds programs that not only grow our nation's clean energy sources, but also create jobs, promote emerging technologies, and maintain critical infrastructure. And yet, while making these cuts, it increases weapon activities by $97.7 million above the 2013 levels. Here we have a bill that prioritizes unnecessary weapons and defense programs at the expense of our nation's innovation and international competitiveness. The underlying bill slashes funding for a valuable program called the Advanced Research Project Agency Energy, ARPA-E. It cuts funding for this critical program, which yesterday in our Rules Committee, both the ranking member and the subcommittee chair agreed that they were fans of, by $215 million below last year's funding level. ARPA-E was modeled after DARPA, the Department of Defense's Advanced Research Projects Agency, which has led to so many great innovative technologies that improve our security as a country. And in its few short years of existence, ARPA-E has funded 285 projects in 33 states, projects that promise to transform the energy future for our country. ARPA-E's rigorous program design and competitive project selection process show that our taxpayer dollars are being used wisely, and the program has paid off. Since 2009, 17 ARPA-E programs have leveraged the small initial investment, which is typically $500,000, $1 million, $2 million. 17 programs have leveraged that into $70 million of capital, and additional investments from the private sector of $450 million. I was a founder of several startup companies before I came to Congress, and I understand the value of risk-taking and the role the government has in promoting innovation in basic technology. I represent a district with 2 major research universities that receive a combined federal research investment of about $700 million. Many of these basic technologies, which we as a country invest in, lead to the jobs and the companies and the consumer technologies of the future. And what could be more critical than putting our nation on a path to sustainable energy development? Just this last February, I met with an ARPA-E project team from my district. Within the first year of receiving ARPA-E fundings, this University of Colorado project team had demonstrated important energy yield improvements for solar and cost reduction potential in photovoltaic power systems. That's just one example of the many successes achieved by ARPA-E projects that will help boost our economic well-being as a country and lead to our energy independence and national security far more than a few more unneeded nuclear missiles. My colleagues on both sides of the aisle know that this program is essential to protecting our energy future, and that's why this program, ARPA-E, has been lauded by Democrats and Republicans alike, as it was in our Rules Committee yesterday evening. Mr. Speaker, this bill also disproportionately cuts from science and clean energy programs while bolstering wasteful spending for fossil fuel subsidies, continue to wed our country to subsidizing oil and gas, to subsidizing nuclear weapons, while making cuts in our energy future. By maintaining these fossil fuel subsidies while cutting clean energy research, we're prioritizing fossil fuels over innovative technologies that actually hold the key to our clean, sustainable energy independence. While I appreciate that this bill has some decreases to the amount of federal subsidies going to the fossil fuel accounts compared to last year, I think it's high time that we end these subsidies to one of America's most profitable industries. This report language from the committee seems to be searching for a reason to spend our precious taxpayer dollars in a time of sequestration and a time of deficits. How can we spend more on fossil fuels when we should be spending less? In addition, this bill needlessly increases the funding for weapons activities and defense programs at a time where we're winding down our involvement in 2 wars that have been very costly in lives and in dollars this last decade. And that's why I'm offering an amendment with Representative Quigley that would reduce the B-61 life extension back to the agency's request level, which would save $23.7 million in taxpayer dollars and reduce the deficit. This bill actually increases funding by over $20 million for these ongoing missile programs in an era when Americans should expect that our government is more transparent about how this money is invested. Now look, some of these missiles represent a strategic commitment we have to our NATO allies. There have been growing concern raised by the Air Force's own Blue Ribbon Review panel about the effectiveness and security vulnerabilities of the B-61. And that's why the price for this program has continued to rise dramatically, and confidence in the missile program has dropped. In fact, some of our NATO allies, like Germany, have actually called for the B-61s to be removed from their borders. Again, given our fiscal constraints, it's a time of choices. It's nice to have it all, but I think we need to ensure that taxpayer money is not wasted on programs that fail to sufficiently protect our national security, and in fact, some of our allies don't even support. Another unneeded increase in this funding bill, throwing more government money after more government money, is for the W-76 life extension program. The current bill requests $248 million, $13 million more than the administration requested, because of a fear of a lack of nuclear deterrence capability if we reduce our stockpile below the levels required in the New START treaty. To put that in perspective, the START treaty requires us to have no more than 1,550 nuclear weapons. Isn't that enough, Mr. Speaker? 1,500 nuclear weapons? How many times can we completely obliterate not only our enemies but the entire world with 1,500 weapons? Even this lower stockpile of nuclear weapons is frankly a relic of our foreign policy during the Cold War and can be drastically reduced. Unfortunately, this bill increases it. In fact, the Arms Control Association identified over $39 billion in savings to the taxpayer if we reduced our nuclear weapons stockpile to 1,000 nuclear weapons. More than enough to deter any threat to the United States, more than enough to obliterate humanity from the planet. We can save $39 billion by going down to 1,000 nuclear weapons. These are some of the many reasons that I oppose the underlying bill. I'm very supportive of this rule coming forward from our committee that will allow for a full and open debate. I hope that many of these ideas that I have presented, and as well as other ideas from members on both sides of the aisle, will prevail. So the end product, work product of this House is something that Democrats and Republicans can join together in supporting, something that no longer sacrifices our renewable energy future for yet more and more nuclear weapons today. I reserve the balance of my time.
Reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself 1 minute.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the Speaker for the recognition. I do feel obligated to point out that, of course, the object under discussion currently is the rule that will allow us to debate the Energy and Water Appropriation Bill. The rule is an open rule. The gentleman has disagreements with the language in the underlying bill. It's an open rule. He's free to bring those amendments to the floor, have a full and fair debate, both sides, one opposed, one in support, and the will of the House will prevail. That's the way it should be.
Will the gentleman yield?
That's the way it should be under an open rule. My time is limited. Let me just state that I have, for the record, I have amendments that I will be placing before the House. I hope they're accepted, but I will accept the underlying bill even in the absence of those amendments, and I hope the gentleman from Colorado will approach it in a similar spirit. I'm going to reserve the balance of my time. Obviously, the gentleman has ample time to continue the discussion.
Gentleman from Texas reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
I was just going to comment to the gentleman that the committee work product, the bill before us, is a highly flawed bill. I certainly hope that the open process and the will of the House will significantly alter and improve upon this bill. We will find that out in the days ahead. It's my honor, Mr. Speaker, to yield 3.5 minutes to the gentlewoman from California, a former colleague of mine on the Rules Committee, Ms. Matsui.
Gentlewoman from California is recognized for 3.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman from Colorado for yielding me time. Mr. Speaker, my district of Sacramento is one of the leading clean energy economies of this country. The sharp cuts to clean energy initiatives in this bill are deeply troubling. It will no doubt hurt American innovation and American jobs, particularly as other nations continue to invest in clean energy technologies. It is also not reflective of an all-of-the-above energy strategy that our nation desperately needs. At the same time, this bill addresses some of the important flood protection priorities of my district. Sacramento is the most at-risk metropolitan area for major flooding, as it lies at the confluence of the American and Sacramento rivers. We have a great deal at risk. As the home of the state capital and 500,000 people, a major flood event in Sacramento would have economic damages of up to $40 billion. I am pleased that this bill includes nearly $70 million in funding for Sacramento's flood protection priorities, including more than $66 million to continue construction on the Folsom Dam joint federal project. In addition, this bill includes report language which I requested, expressing concern with the Corps' current levee vegetation policy. Sacramento is ground zero for the impact of the Corps' vegetation policy. Instead of a one-size-fits-all solution, the Corps should consider regional variations and local input as called for under bipartisan legislation I introduced in H.R. 399, the Levee Vegetation Review Act. The bill also includes report language, which I also requested, expressing concern with the Corps' decision to end its Section 104 crediting policy, which has halted flood protection projects from moving forward, particularly in West Sacramento. Mr. Speaker, moving forward, we must also be cognizant that there are other much-needed public safety projects that remain unfunded and unbuilt due to a lack of a word bill. We urgently need to improve America's crumbling levee infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, in Sacramento, my constituents have taxed themselves twice, and $350 million of construction work is well underway for the Natomas Levee Improvement Project, all while awaiting congressional authorization for over 2 years after receiving a chief's report from the Army Corps of Engineers. Mr. Speaker, on May 15th, the Senate passed a robust word bill with clear bipartisan support of 83 to 14. It is my sincere hope that the House will soon follow suit. We cannot wait until the next disaster that will take lives and wreck our economy. This is a bipartisan issue that must be addressed immediately in Congress, and I yield back the balance of my time.
He yields back. The gentleman from Colorado reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, let me yield myself 30 seconds, and I also want to
recognized for 30 seconds.
Respond to something that was said in the initial opening by the minority. The student loan bill passed this House over a month ago. It has been sitting in the Senate for the entire month of June. The problem with student loans could have been addressed by the other body. It could have been addressed prior to the July 1st deadline, which was a deadline after all, that the Democrats had set when they were in the majority. So to say that the House has not done its work is in fact not correct. The House has done its work. We await the other body to act. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
To further address the student loan issue, this body did pass a bill to prevent the increase in student loan rates that just occurred. However, that bill, a very similar bill, failed in the Senate. So the Klein bills failed in the Senate. So too a Democratic bill to provide a 2-year extension of the student loan rates also failed in the Senate. So at this point, the victim of all this are students in our country who are forced, just going back to school, will be forced to borrow at twice the rate, at 6.8%, if Congress can't get its act together. And that's why, if we defeat the previous question, I'll offer an amendment to the rule to bring up H.R. 2574, the Keep Student Loans Affordable Act, sponsored by Representative George Miller, Representative Rubin Hinojosa, myself, and several others, which would undo the recent doubling of student loan interest rates. It's that simple. While we work towards a market-oriented solution along the parameters that President Obama has spelled out, making sure we have the protections in place like caps for students everywhere, we need to at least make sure that students returning to school this fall are not borrowing at a rate twice the rate of last year. To discuss this bill, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, my colleague on the Education and Workforce Committee, Mr. Hinojosa.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to urge my colleagues to support H.R. 2574, entitled the Student Loans Affordable Act of 2013. Legislation that would extend and fully pay for an additional year of the 3.4% interest rate on subsidized federal direct Stafford loans. Given that millions of students and families are struggling to afford the skyrocketing cost of a college education, it's shocking to me that this Congress allowed interest rates to double on July the 1st. I'm afraid that this Republican majority Congress is making college more expensive and for millions of students. With the student debt surpassing $1 trillion, another increase of $1,000 of debt would be damaging to millions of students already struggling to afford basic expenses like rent and food. The student loan debt crisis is crushing the dreams and aspirations of students and college graduates. High levels of debt are creating obstacles for young people who hope to start a family, purchase a home, and save for retirement. At this rate, they cannot accomplish those standard goals that every American should be able to achieve. In my view, student loan debt sets our country backward, not forward. Without Congress's swift action, more than 7 million low and moderate income students working towards a college degree will have to pay an additional $1,000 for each loan that they borrow. The Keep Student Loans Affordable Act of 2013 will secure low interest rates for an additional year as Congress works on a long-term and sustainable approach for the federal student loan program that works for both students and taxpayers. Importantly, this bill will help secure that college remains within reach for students who rely on federal loans to pay for their education. In stark contrast, the GOP student loan plan is irresponsible and puts students in a yearly adjustable student loan, which will result in great unpredictability and skyrocketing costs. What's more, the GOP bills add more debt onto students, even more than the doubling of the interest rates. In a globally competitive economy, an education is clearly a necessity. This Congress should be helping students afford a college education, not settling them with student loan debt. As ranking member of the Subcommittee on Higher Education and Workforce Training, I ask my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to do what is right and pass H.R. 2574 to reverse the student loan rate increase. I yield back.
The gentleman from Texas yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Colorado reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll yield myself 30 seconds for the purpose of response.
The gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
And again, if I recall correctly, the bill that the gentleman from Texas just referenced has only Democratic sponsors. It is not a bipartisan bill. The other body, completely controlled by Democrats in the majority, has within its power to pass a bill, conference with the Republican-passed bill here on the House, and work out the problem. They have failed to do so. The House has done its work. The House-passed bill was received in the Senate on the 3rd of June. It has been there for over a month. The other body certainly has within its power to act. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Again, to respond to that, the bill that the House passed failed in the United States Senate. So, too, did a 2-year delay in keeping the student loan rates low. That has failed in the Senate. So we can simply say, oh, we're just not going to do anything and let student loan rates double, or we can take it upon ourselves in this body to try to find a new way. And that's what the Democrats and Ranking Member Miller have put forward, a way to say, look, we couldn't agree on 2 years, we couldn't agree on a long-term solution. Let's give us a 1-year window where the kids coming back to school in a month aren't going to be borrowing at twice the rate that they were last year. We have the chief sponsor of the bill here to speak about it. And, Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from California, the ranking member of the Committee on Education and Workforce, Mr. Miller. From California is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. As we debate this rule, it has now been a little over a week since interest rates on loans for millions of the neediest college students doubled thanks to the Republican obstructionism. With that doubling, those who can afford it least will continue to be burdened under the mountain of debt with no end in sight. because Congress has not acted in a responsible way. This rate increase will cost borrowers an additional $1,000 per student per loan. The doubling of the interest rates did not have to happen. Rather than making it more affordable for students and families to pay for college, the House Republicans decided to pass a bill that would make college more expensive. The bill was dead on arrival in the Senate. It was dead on arrival in the Senate because it was worse for students than the doubling of the interest rates, and it left the students without an option other than the doubling of the interest rates, and that's why we must act today. We must defeat the previous question so that we can deliberate this and get a solution until we can work on a long-term bipartisan agreement on this one. The Republican plan that passed the House was totally irresponsible. It was simply not a smart solution. It has been advertised by my friends on the other side as a long-term fix, but we all know the truth. The Republican bills add more debt onto the students, even more than doubling the interest rates. The Republican bill also puts students at a yearly adjustable student loans, which result in great unpredictability and soaring loan costs to the students and to their families. And at the instance from the GOP that the students pay down the national debt, outrageous and offensive. The student loan program is a program that the federal government makes $50 billion off the back of the students, and the Republicans' response is that the students should pay higher interest rates so they can pay down the national deficit. The student loan program itself is paying down the national deficit because of the profit the federal governments make. It's time to stop that and make student loans affordable for students and for their family. This Congress simply has not done right by students. They're forcing these students to continue to graduate with an increasing mountain of debt, while at the same time they lament that students are graduating with increased debt. That's what the Republicans offered. That's why, as my colleague from Colorado said, it was dead on arrival when it went to the Senate. It was dead on a bipartisan basis when it went to the Senate. The time has come now to defeat the previous question so that we can bring the one-year fix to make sure that students are protected from the doubling of the interest rates that is now occurring because of the inaction by the Republicans in the House of Representatives. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Colorado reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, just a bit of a history lesson. In 2007, democratically controlled House, democratically controlled Senate passed the student loan rates. They built into the law an expiration date of last July. Last July, a one-year extension was passed. This year, the Republican House passed a responsible extension. The Senate, the other body, needs to do its work. When they do, we're here to talk. I now wish to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the rule for the Energy and Water Appropriation Bill. This historically has been one of the first appropriation bills brought to the floor. I'd like to inform the members that as is the practice of the Republicans in the majority, it's an open rule, and there are a number of amendments that will be made, and it's my understanding any individual who wishes to offer an amendment can come to the floor and do so. The bill is coming in at $30.4 billion, which is $2.9 billion below fiscal 2013 enacted, and $4 billion below the President's request. So the Appropriations Committee is operating in compliance with the House budget that we passed several months ago. This is a good rule. It's a good bill. I would hope that we can support the rule and obviously support the bill. And I would like to also add an editorial comment on the student loan rate issue. Obviously, we want those interest rates to be as low as possible, but I would point out to my friends on the other side of the aisle that the House passed the bill. It's waiting to be brought up in the other body. They could bring it up tomorrow and vote it, send it to the President for his signature. Apparently, the great sin in the House-passed bill appears to be that it moves towards an adjustable rate interest rate as opposed to a fixed rate that is below market rates. And we would all like to have 0% interest, obviously, but in this current environment, sometimes we have to I'm told you have all kinds of time, so I would not yield, but I appreciate you wanting to ask me to. And with that, I will yield back the balance of my time to the distinguished member of the Rules Committee.
Gentleman from Texas yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Texas reserves. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
I thank the gentleman. I just know that there have been less speakers on the other side, and I was hoping that we might be able to use some of the all kinds of time in a bipartisan way. The gentleman from Texas was not accurate in saying that the House bill awaits action in the Senate. It had a vote in the Senate. It did not pass. So too a 2-year extension did not reach the cloture vote. So again, here we are. We can either start blaming each other, the folks on the other side of the building, or we can actually do something and get to work to keep student loan rates low for America's college students. And of course Democrats are open to tying something into market-based rates. President Obama even proposed such. So if that's what the gentleman wants to do, let's engage in a discussion about that. In the meantime, let's pass a 1-year extension so the rates don't double, which they already did 2 weeks ago when the kids come back to school in the fall. Mr. Speaker, I would like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, a leader on this issue and a colleague of mine on the Education and Workforce Committee, Mr. Andrews.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 3 minutes.
I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks. Thank you.
The gentleman is recognized.
I thank my friend for the time. A lot of American families are getting their financial aid notices for the new academic year. And much to their chagrin, they're opening these envelopes and finding out that the student loan that cost them 3.4% last year is going to cost them 6.8% starting this year. This is a huge problem for the millions of American families who borrow money to educate their children or themselves. Now, what the Congress has produced on this thus far is blame and finger-pointing. So here's what happened. The Republican majority passed a bill on this floor that actually made the problem worse. That actually would cost more than just going up to the 6.8% by about $4,000 per student over a 5-year period. They actually poured kerosene on the fire. Sent that bill over to the Senate. The Senate rejected the bill and didn't pass anything else. Now, I regret all of that, but ladies and gentlemen, we have 2 choices in front of us today. We can quit on the issue and quit on America's students, or we can try to do something about it. I think we should try to do something about it. Here's the something. Mr. Miller has a proposal that would keep the rates at 3.4% for 1 more year. It would pay for this and not add a dime to the deficit by closing a tax loophole that exists for fairly wealthy people. Our proposal is we should put that bill on the floor and take a vote on it. I hope that a majority of members would vote yes to help American students in this way, but we're not even requiring that. We're simply saying that what we should do this afternoon on this floor is put that proposal up for a vote. In a couple of minutes, we're going to take a vote on whether to take a vote on that question. Now, as is often the case around here, the rules are a little backward. Those who vote no on the next vote are voting in favor of bringing this up so the Congress can work its will. Those who vote yes are saying we should not do that. The choice is clear. We either take a vote and try to fix this problem, or we quit on America's students and America's families. Let's do our job and take a vote on this bill. I yield back.
The gentleman from New Jersey yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Colorado reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, may I inquire of the other side as to whether or not you have additional speakers?
We're not aware of any at this time. There might be one more coming, but if they're not here, I'm prepared to close.
I have the right to close. Is that correct?
That's it.
That's correct.
Okay. I'll reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Texas reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Yields myself as time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Again, we wonder why this body has an approval rating of 12%. Instead of tackling issues that Americans want us to tackle, like finally fixing our broken immigration system, which, by the way, a bill received more than 2/3 support in the Senate, Democrats and Republicans. It's hard to get 2/3 of anybody to agree on anything. And yet 70% of Americans support comprehensive immigration reform, 2/3 of the United States Senate. Let's bring that bill up and pass it. Student loans? Sure, we can cast blame on the Senate. We can cast blame on whoever we feel like. But the fact is, American families are borrowing at 6.8% instead of 3.4% now, this fall. student loans. So we can either just say, okay, it's not our fault, we passed something, let's go home, or we can actually try to reach a solution. If we can defeat the previous question today, we could bring Representative Miller's bill right to the floor to allow a one-year window for Congress to work this out and keep student loan rate at 3.4% and prevent our next generation of college kids from having their backs broken under the weight of high-interest student loans. Mr. Speaker, with regard to this bill, again, not the bill that America wants us to be discussing, instead a bill that cuts our renewable energy future, puts even more money into nuclear weapons, I can't support this committee report on the energy and water spending bill. I hope that through this process, the will of the House changes this bill dramatically. If not, then we're simply making the wrong decisions for our energy future. The bill slashes critical funding that would create jobs, grow our economy, lead to energy security, increase our competitiveness. At the same time, the bill adds spending to increase our nuclear weapon stockpiles. How can we expect to keep nuclear weapons out of the hands of terrorists if we cut the nuclear non-proliferation activities by $600 million under this bill? While the bill increases funding for our weapons programs and continues funding for fossil fuel subsidies, it guts many of our renewable energy programs like ARPA-E, the Department of Energy Office of Science, and investing in the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. This bill threatens to increase our reliance on foreign oil, reduce job growth, increase pollution, and damage the health of American families. If we don't act to reverse this legislation's deep cuts to science programs and energy research, the United States will have many, many missiles armed with nuclear warheads, but we will fall behind our global competitors who are investing heavily in renewable and next-generation energy technologies. I strongly urge that we defeat the previous question, and I urge a no vote on the underlying bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Colorado yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I can't recall